My name is Petra Osei. I am 31 years old. And on the evening of March 8th, I walked across a stage in front of 340 people while my mother stood 30 feet away telling her book club friends that I couldn't hold down a job. I want to be careful about how I tell this story. I have had 14 months to sit with it, to separate the wound from the lesson, the anger from the grief. Because what happened at the Ardmore Education Gala that Thursday night was not simply an embarrassing moment in a crowded ballroom. It was the final confirmation of something I had spent most of my adult life trying not to name. My mother didn't lie about me out of cruelty. That's what made it so hard to deal with for so long. She lied out of habit. She lied out of need. And in some ways that made the whole thing sadder and more complicated and harder to let go of than outright malice would have been. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. Or at least at the beginning that matters. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday when my event coordinator, Janelle Bright, sent me a text from the lobby of the Hargrove Convention Center. The message said, "Your guests are seated at table 11. 5 women plus 1 more, who arrived late. They seem lovely." There was a small yellow star emoji at the end, which was very Janelle. I was backstage in the green room, standing in front of a floor-length mirror in the kind of dress that takes 30 minutes to put on correctly. The zipper at the back had caught twice. I had a half-full glass of sparkling water on the table and my slide clicker in my hand, and I was running the opening of my keynote in my head, moving my lips slightly, the way I always do when I'm nervous, but not willing to admit it. I was not thinking about my mother. I was thinking about the $340,000 funding pledge from the Whitmore Family Foundation that we were planning to announce from the stage that evening, and whether the slide transition on frame 17 was going to behave the way I'd set it up that morning. What I did not know, what I would only learn 3 days later, from a woman named Deborah Hollis, one of my mother's book club friends who felt guilty enough to pick up the phone and call me, was that a conversation had begun at table 11 approximately 12 minutes before I took the stage. My mother's name is Constance Osei. She is 63 years old, 5 feet 4, and she has worn the same shade of coral lipstick since approximately 1994. She is warm, funny, socially fluent in every room she enters, and she has been telling people a version of my life that bears almost no resemblance to my actual life for at least the past 6 years. According to Deborah, here is what happened at table 11. Deborah thought it was a woman named Rosamund Achebe, who has been in my mother's book club for 11 years and has met me exactly twice, picked up the event program from the center of the table, and asked what the gala was raising money for. The program was a heavy, cream-colored booklet with a burgundy embossed cover. The first interior page was a full-color headshot of me, taken the previous September by a photographer named Colin Frew, who also shoots for 3 regional magazines. Beneath the photo, in clean serif type, were my name, my title, and 3 sentences of biography. Petra Osei, founder and executive director of the Osei Learning Initiative. Tonight's keynote speaker. Since founding the initiative in 2018, Petra has partnered with over 20 school districts across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware to redesign literacy and budget equity programs serving more than 14,000 students. My mother took the program from Rosamund and set it face down on the table before anyone else could read the first page. Then she said, "It's an education thing. Petra helped out with something for them. She's been going through a rough patch, you know how it is. She can't seem to find stable work in her field. I keep telling her to just take something steady, even if it's not exactly what she wants. But she's stubborn. She gets that from her father." Rosamund nodded. She said something sympathetic about how hard it was for young people right now. My mother said she had a few contracts here and there. Nothing that really stuck. She's talented. She's just, I don't know. She doesn't always make the practical choice. And then a third woman at the table, whose name Deborah couldn't remember clearly, someone's guest, picked up her own program from in front of her water glass, turned it over, and began reading. She looked up at my mother. She looked back down at the program. She said slowly, "Constance, is this your daughter?" My mother went quiet. 8 minutes later, the house lights in the main hall dimmed to a warm amber, and the audio technician faded the background music, and a voice from the sound system said, clearly and with some ceremony, Please welcome to the stage the founder of the Osei Learning Initiative and tonight's keynote speaker, Petra Osei. The applause started before I reached the podium. I had no idea any of this was happening. I walked out smiling into a room of 340 people, adjusted the microphone stand, took one breath, clicked to my first slide, and began. Before I tell you what happened when the gala ended and I finally made my way to table 11, tell me where you are right now. Morning?
Night?
Middle of the afternoon when you should probably be doing something else? Wherever you are, I want you to stay with me because the story only gets stranger and sadder and, eventually, a little bit like something you might recognize from your own family. To understand what happened at table 11, you have to understand what had been happening at every table, in every room, for the previous 7 years. I founded the Osei Learning Initiative in January 2018 with $6,200 in personal savings, a beat-up laptop I had carried through graduate school, and a consulting contract from a mid-sized school district in central Pennsylvania that needed help auditing their literacy program budget allocations. I was 24 years old. I had just completed a master's degree in education policy at Rutgers University the previous May, and my thesis advisor there, a woman named Dr. Miriam Kahlo, who is one of the sharpest people I have ever met and who has very little patience for people who mistake caution for wisdom, had pulled me aside after my thesis defense and told me something that changed the direction of my life. She said, "You keep describing an organization that doesn't exist. Stop describing it and start building it." I thought about that for 6 months. I applied for 3 institutional jobs. I got one offer. I turned it down. And in December 2017, I told my mother that I was going to start a nonprofit consultancy instead. She was standing at the kitchen counter in the house I grew up in Willingboro, New Jersey. She set down the mug she was holding. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "So, you're going to freelance." She said it exactly the way you might say, "So you're going to eat cereal for dinner." Technically permissible, not something a serious person does long-term. I tried to explain that it was more structured than freelancing. I explained the contract, the model, the kind of school districts we were going to work with, the long-term goal of building a replicable program that other consultancies couldn't easily replicate because it was built around relationships rather than templates. She listened with the slightly tilted head expression I had learned to recognize over the previous 24 years, the one that meant she was waiting for me to finish, so she could ask the practical question that would reframe everything I had just said as a risk. She said, "Is there health insurance?" There was not, at that point, health insurance. I was on a marketplace plan that cost me $217 per month with a $4,500 deductible. I told her this.
She made a small sound.
I want to be fair to my mother here. She is not a cold person. She is not a person who doesn't love her children. She raised me and my younger sister Nana largely on her own after my father moved back to Accra when I was 11, and she did it while working as an office manager for pediatric dental practice and somehow still making dinner most nights and attending every school event that was even loosely mandatory. She worked hard. She valued stability because she had learned, the hard way, what happened when stability disappeared. I understand all of this. I have understood it for a long time. What I didn't understand for a much longer time was that her need to see me as struggling, to tell the story of her daughter, who was talented but impractical, who had potential but couldn't quite land, was not just a failure of imagination. It was structural.
It was something she needed.
By September 2019, the Osei Learning Initiative had 3 full-time staff members, a $287,000 annual operating budget, and active partnerships with 11 school districts across Pennsylvania and New Jersey. We had a formal office space, 640 square feet in a shared professional building in Montclair that cost us $2,847 per month, and I had been invited to present findings at 2 national education policy conferences, one in Chicago and one in Portland. After the Portland conference, I called my mother from my hotel room at 9:15 p.m. on a Wednesday night because I was proud and I wanted, in that still intact part of me that had not yet fully processed what was happening, to share it with her. She asked if I was eating well. She asked if Portland was expensive. And then she told me that her neighbor Linda's daughter, a woman I had met once at a block party, briefly, we had talked about parking, had just been hired as a claims processor at a benefits management firm in Cherry Hill, and that Linda was so relieved. She said it in a voice that carried the implication clearly. Isn't that nice, to have something solid, something your mother doesn't have to worry about? I said I was glad for Linda's daughter. I finished the call. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed for about 10 minutes looking at the carpet. I stopped sharing professional updates with my mother after that call. Not dramatically, not as a decision I announced. I just stopped. What I didn't know, because I couldn't see it from where I was standing, was that she had not stopped sharing her version of my professional news with everyone around her. 3 weeks before my 28th birthday, in October 2020, my cousin Adwoa called me on a Sunday afternoon to ask, gently, if I was going through something. She had heard from her mother, my Auntie Gloria, that I had lost my main contracts and was struggling to stay afloat financially. Neither of those things was true. By October 2020, I was earning $74,300 per year as my own salary from the initiative, plus an additional $8,500 in consulting stipends from 2 partner organizations. My rent was $1,847 per month for the 1-bedroom apartment in Montclair I had been in since August 2019. I had not been late on rent a single time. I called my mother the next morning and asked, as calmly as I could, where Auntie Gloria had gotten that information. My mother said, I was just expressing concern.
I worry about you. I always worry about you.
Nobody else seems to. I said, Mom, I'm doing well. The organization is growing. There's nothing to worry about. She said, you don't have to pretend everything is fine for my benefit. I'm your mother. I did not know how to respond to that. So I said, I know. I'll talk to you later this week. And I hung up. My therapist at the time was a man named Marcus Fuel, who had an office on Bloomfield Avenue in Montclair and charged $185 per session and had a habit of letting silences run longer than was comfortable until the person in the chair was forced to say the thing they had been carefully not saying. I had been seeing him since March 2020, initially for what I described as work stress and some family stuff. By late 2020, the family stuff had become the primary subject. In a session in November of that year, I described the pattern to him carefully, the phone calls that framed my success as precariousness, the way she relayed her concern to extended family as though I were in crisis, the sense that she needed the struggling version of me to remain available as a story she could tell. Marcus listened, and then used a phrase I wrote down in the small notebook I keep for that purpose. He said, that's what some people call weaponized concern. The care is real, but it functions as control. And the hardest thing about it is that it's genuinely hard to be angry at someone who is, in their own framework, only trying to help. He was right. It was hard to be angry. It was actually much easier to be sad. By the time the Ardmore Education Gala was scheduled for March 8th of last year, the Osei Learning Initiative had an annual operating budget of $1.3 million, 18 partner districts across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland, and a full-time staff of 11 people, most of whom I had hired personally and trained directly. We had received a Regional Excellence Award from the Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators in October of the previous year, and I had been profiled in an education policy journal the previous spring, a 4-page piece with a photo of me in one of our partner school libraries, standing next to a shelf of new books that had been purchased using funds we had helped redirect from an administrative budget that was, by any reasonable measure, bloated. The keynote invitation had come from Ardmore Foundation's executive director, a man named Gerald Whitmore, who had been referred to us by the superintendent of one of our Chester County partner districts. Gerald had called me personally in November to ask if I would anchor their annual gala. He was offering a $3,200 honorarium plus travel and parking. I said yes on the spot. I told my mother about the keynote in early February. I was explicit. I said, Mom, I've been asked to give the main speech at a charity gala in March. It's a real invitation, a paid one. I would love for you to be there. She said she was proud of me. She said she would bring some friends, so it would be more of an event.
She asked if it was black tie.
I said business formal. She said she would need to find something to wear. I thought, and this is the part that I am still working through even now, 14 months later, that perhaps the invitation would change something. That she would see my name on the program, or hear the introduction, or watch me walk to that stage, and something would click into place for her. That she would finally see the distance between the story she was telling and the person standing in front of her. It didn't occur to me that she might, instead, turn the program face down. In February of last year, approximately 3 weeks before the gala, I received an email from a former colleague named Simone Adeyemi, who had worked briefly with the initiative as a project consultant in 2021 and whom I liked very much and still traded messages with occasionally. Simone's email was dated February 19th and had arrived at 2:23 p.m. on a Wednesday. The subject line was just my name, which is how I knew before I opened it that it was something she was slightly uncomfortable sending. She wrote that she had been at a church retirement party for a mutual acquaintance the previous weekend and had spoken with a woman named Yvette, who knew my mother socially. Yvette had mentioned, in the course of a larger conversation about nonprofit work, that Constance Osei's daughter was still trying to find her footing in the sector and that Constance worried about her constantly. Simone wrote, "I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure what to say. But I wanted you to know in case you didn't. I'm sorry if this is awkward." I read the email twice. Then I forwarded it to Marcus Fuel with a single line. More of the same. Scheduling session. We met on February 24th at 3 p.m. I had printed the email and brought it with me. I also brought 3 other pieces of documentation I had been quietly assembling: a text thread with my cousin Adwoa from 2020, a voicemail transcription from my Auntie Gloria that I had typed out word for word, and a note I had written to myself the previous December after my mother, at a family gathering I had attended without Nana, had introduced me to her friend Pauletta's. My daughter, who does the nonprofit thing, she's finding her way. I had been in the room. She had said it about me, not to me, in a voice low enough that she perhaps thought I couldn't hear. I had heard. Marcus looked at the papers I spread on his desk.
He was quiet for a while.
Then he said, "I think you already know what this is. And I think you've known what you need to do for longer than you're admitting. The question isn't what's happening. You've been describing it clearly for 2 years. The question is what you're going to do now that you've stopped being able to explain it away."
I did not answer him that day.
But I went home and I called my attorney. Her name is Diane Okafor. She handles all of the initiative's contracts, partnership agreements, and organizational filings, and she is one of the most precise people I have ever worked with, the kind of lawyer who uses words like specifically and precisely even in casual conversation, as though ambiguity is a habit she has systematically eliminated. I described the pattern to her. The years of misrepresentation, the family network through which the false narrative had spread, the recent instance involving a professional contact. Diane listened without interrupting. Then she said, "In formal professional contexts, if any of this reached funders or potential partners, this could approach tortious interference. In social contexts, it's unlikely to meet the defamation threshold, but that doesn't mean it isn't harmful, and it doesn't mean you can't document it." She paused and said, "Start keeping a log. Dates, quotes, witnesses where you have them. Not because you're going to take legal action. Because documentation changes behavior, yours and hers." On March 1st, she sent me a brief written summary of our conversation and her recommendation. I saved it in a folder on my desktop labeled, simply, Record. I had not done anything with any of it yet. The gala was 1 week away. I had made a decision, sitting in my car in the parking lot outside Marcus Fuel's office at 4:41 p.m. on February 24th, with the engine running and the heat on because it was a cold afternoon and I didn't want to go home yet. The decision was this. I was not going to warn her. I was not going to uninvite her. I was not going to call and say, carefully, that I hoped she understood what the evening was. I was going to let the evening be what it was, my work, my name, my stage, and I was going to see what she did with it. And whatever happened after that was going to be entirely and finally up to her. After my keynote, which ran 33 minutes, which was 2 minutes over my planned time because I added an unscripted moment near the end when I talked about a specific student at one of our partner schools, a 12-year-old boy named Marcus who had gone from reading at a 2nd grade level to a 6th grade level in 14 months, and the room got so quiet when I described it that I had to slow down. I stood near the edge of the stage for the better part of 20 minutes. I talked to Gerald Whitmore, who shook my hand with both of his and said, "That's the best keynote we've had in 8 years," and I believed him because he did not seem like a man who said things he didn't mean. I talked to a woman named Dr. Carol Fish, the superintendent of one of our Bucks County partner districts, who wanted to discuss expanding our engagement into their middle school humanities curriculum. I gave a brief comment to a reporter from the Chester County Education desk named Yolanda Price, who was filing a short piece for the following morning and asked about the funding announcement. I shook hands with a man whose name I didn't catch who told me his daughter wanted to work in education policy and could he take my card. At approximately 8:19 p.m., Janelle Bright appeared at my elbow, quiet and efficient as always, and said, "Your mom is asking for you." I said, "Okay." I picked up a glass of water from a passing tray. I excused myself from the conversation I was in, and then I walked through the room slowly, not because I was building up to something, not because I was composing myself or rehearsing what I was going to say. I walked slowly because I was genuinely not in a hurry. Something had gone still in me at some point during the evening. I cannot pinpoint exactly when, maybe during the applause when I first reached the podium, maybe somewhere in the middle of a speech, maybe in the parking lot 2 weeks earlier, and the stillness was not numbness. It was more like having finally put something down that I had been carrying for a long time without realizing how heavy it was. Something inside me had stopped asking for her permission. I reached table 11 at 8:24 p.m. My mother was standing. Her 6 friends were seated around the table in various states of attention. Rosamond Achebe was looking at her phone. 2 women I didn't recognize were talking quietly. Deborah Hollis was watching me approach with an expression I still think about sometimes. Not pity exactly. More like the expression of someone who has witnessed something and is not sure whether to mention it. My mother opened her arms. I walked into them. I hugged her the way you hug someone when you love them, and have also, finally, stopped performing the shape of a relationship that only functions when you stay small. Brief, warm, complete. She said, "Baby, you were wonderful up there. You were so confident. I am so proud of you." I said, "Thank you for coming, Mom." I turned to her friends. I said hello to each of them by name. My mother had told me who was coming, so I knew most of the names. I thanked them for being there. Rosamond Achebe stood up and shook my hand with genuine warmth and said, "Your mother talks about you all the time. It's wonderful to finally put a face to, well, to all of this." She gestured at the room, the stage, the screen still showing the last slide of my presentation, with the initiative's logo and our website. I smiled and said, "I hope you all had a good evening." I answered a question Deborah asked about the literacy audit model. I explained briefly, to the table generally, what the $340,000 pledge from the Whitmore Foundation was going to fund. I did not look at my mother with any particular expression. I did not say anything pointed or weighted or designed to land a particular way. I just talked about the work. I said goodnight at 8:46 p.m. I kissed my mother on the cheek and told her to text me when she got home safely. And I went back to the donor reception to finish the evening I had spent months preparing for. I did not call her that night. I did not text except to respond to her 10:53 p.m. message, "Home safe. So proud of my girl Redheart. With good, sleep well." I took off my shoes in my front hallway, hung my dress on the back of the bathroom door, put on the cotton sweatshirt I wear when I am specifically trying to be comfortable rather than anything else, and sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water and my phone face down in front of me. I had made a decision during that walk across the ballroom floor, quiet as the carpeting underfoot, clear as anything I had decided in years. I was done letting her tell my story. Those words, specifically those words, in my own head in my own voice. I was done. That was the whole thing. I didn't need to say it to her.
I didn't need to announce it.
I just needed to know it was true. On the morning of March 9th, at 7:18 a.m., I sent my mother a text. I wrote it the night before and saved it as a draft so I could read it fresh in the morning and make sure it said what I meant. The message said, "I know what happened at table 11 last night. Deborah called me this morning. I'm not angry, but I need us to have an honest conversation about something that has been going on for a long time. Can we talk this week?" She read it at 7:31 a.m. I know this because of the read receipt, which I had turned on specifically for this conversation.
She did not respond by text.
By 8:09 a.m., she had called my phone 4 times. I was in the shower for the first two. I let the third and fourth go to voicemail. The first voicemail was 11 seconds long and said only, "Petra, it's your mother. Call me back." The second voicemail was 44 seconds and said that Deborah had completely misunderstood the conversation at the table, that things had been taken out of context, and that she didn't know why Deborah would call me about something so minor. The third voicemail was 2 minutes and 21 seconds. She said she had been trying to protect me from the pressure of other people's expectations, that the women in her book club had a tendency to judge and compare, and she hadn't wanted them putting that on me, and that everything she had said had come from a place of love and worry, and she didn't understand why that was being treated as something wrong. She said, "I have never done anything but support you." The fourth voicemail said, "I don't know why you're punishing me." I listened to all 4 voicemails in sequence, sitting at my kitchen table with my second cup of coffee. At 9:07 a.m., I had a board meeting at 10 a.m. and 2 funder calls in the afternoon, and a full week of work ahead of me. I did not call her back that day. I called her on March 11th at 7 p.m. I had written a short list of things I wanted to say clearly, not a script, just 4 bullet points I had typed into my phone's notes app, so I wouldn't drift. I told her that I was aware she had been describing my career inaccurately to people in her social network for several years, and that I had documentation of specific instances dating back to at least 2020. I told her I understood she might not have intended harm. I told her that intent and impact were different things and that the impact had been real on my family relationships, on at least one professional connection, and on my own sense of whether the people in my life knew who I actually was.
She cried.
She said she hadn't realized how it sounded from the outside. She said she worried about me and that the worry came out wrong sometimes, that she had a tendency to downplay things she was proud of because she didn't want to seem like she was boasting and that it had gone too far. I told her I believed her. I also told her that I needed something specific going forward. I said, "If anyone asks about my work, I need you to say you're proud of me and refer them to our website if they want to learn more. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to contextualize it. You just need to say you're proud." There was a silence. Then she said, "I just want to be part of your life, Petra. That's all I've ever wanted." I said, "You are part of my life. That's why I'm having this conversation instead of just disappearing." My sister Nana called me the next morning, March 12th, at 8:44 a.m. Our mother had apparently called her the previous night, after my call, and described the conversation as an ambush. Nana, who is 28, works in corporate finance, and has approximately zero tolerance for revisionist history, said, "I've been watching this happen to you for years. You were more patient than I would have been." She then told me something I hadn't known. At a family dinner in November of the previous year, a dinner I had not attended because of a work conflict, our mother had told Auntie Gloria and Uncle Kwame that I was living off grants and that the initiative was barely staying afloat. She had said it at the dinner table while Nana sat there. Nana said she hadn't said anything at the time because she didn't know what to do with it. The Osei Learning Initiative had closed that fiscal year with a $214,000 operating surplus. Between March 9th and March 24th, my mother called me 31 times. I answered 14 of those calls. Most of them followed the same arc: the defense, the explanation, the appeal to her love and her worry, the suggestion that I was being cold or ungrateful or punishing her for caring, and then, eventually, a quiet concession that she may have overstated things. On March 24th, at 4:17 p.m., she left a voicemail that was different. It ran 3 minutes and 52 seconds. She said she had been thinking. She said she had talked to her pastor. She said she understood. She actually used the word understood, carefully and deliberately, that she had been telling a story about me that wasn't true, and that she had been doing it for a long time, and that she thought she had done it because watching me build a life that didn't need her in the way she expected to be needed had made her feel left behind. She said she knew that wasn't my problem to solve. She said she was sorry. I sat with that voicemail for 4 days. I played it twice. I didn't respond until March 28th, when I called her in the evening, and we talked for 47 minutes. It was not a simple conversation. It was not a resolution. It was more like the first honest conversation we had ever had about what the relationship actually was, rather than what both of us had been pretending it was. Diane Okafor on March 28th, coincidentally the same day, which I noticed only later, finalized the documentation package I had assembled. Simone's email, Deborah Hollis's account as I had transcribed it from our phone call, the voicemail transcripts, my own dated notes. She filed it in my personal legal records, not as a legal action, with a cover note that read, "Preserved for your protection. Hopefully never needed."
I have not needed it.
I hope I never do. It has now been 14 months since the Ardmore Education Gala. My mother and I speak on the phone every Sunday at 5 p.m. The calls last between 20 and 45 minutes. She asks about the initiative by name. She asks about specific staff members she has met. She asks about the Wilmington District partnership we announced in January of this year because I told her about it in advance and she wanted to understand what it meant before she heard about it from anyone else. Last month, when the Chester County Education Desk ran a follow-up piece on the gala's funding outcomes, she texted me a link to the article and wrote, "I shared this with Rosamund and told her my daughter built this." I saved that text.
It is not a small thing.
I won't tell you that everything is resolved because it isn't. The pattern is old and old patterns don't vanish. They go quiet and they wait, and then something small happens and you feel the familiar shape of them pressing in again. What I can tell you is that I am no longer waiting for a version of my mother that retroactively validates everything I built. I built it in the real world, with real people, in real school buildings where real children are reading better than they were before we arrived. Whether or not my mother describes that accurately at book club, I have stopped needing that to be true in order to know that I am. Some truths I've learned don't need a witness. They just need to be lived. On the Sunday after I called her back, in late March, I made a pour-over coffee. It takes longer than it needs to, but the slowness is part of the point, and I carried it to the window and stood there watching it rain on the empty street below my apartment. The trees on my block were just starting to show green at the tips of the branches. It was 8:17 a.m. I was not thinking about anything in particular. I was just there, in my apartment, in my life, in a version of my story that nobody else gets to narrate. It was enough. It was exactly enough. One thing worth knowing, beyond the story, the pattern my mother engaged in, systematically misrepresenting a family member's professional standing within a social network, is more common than most people acknowledge. It functions as a form of narrative control, and its effects can reach professional relationships in ways that are both difficult to document and genuinely harmful. If you find yourself in a situation where someone close to you is shaping the story that others hear about you, documentation is not aggression. It is clarity. It is the difference between being gaslit about your own history and being able to point to the record. If you were in Petra's place at table 11, would you have let the program speak for itself, walked to that podium, and had the private conversation afterward? Or would you have confronted your mother in front of her friends, in the moment, while 340 people were still in the room?